Defense leaders and experts from around the region are gathered in Singapore today for the Shangri-La Dialogue. Just minutes ago, the defense chiefs of the US and China held talks on the sidelines of the summit amid escalating trade tensions between the two countries, as well as differences over security issues. Ahead of the meeting, US Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan told reporters that China's military actions in the South China Sea have been excessive. Now, for the latest on this, let's cross over to our correspondent Jeremy Ko, who's at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. Jeremy, what details do you have from the meeting of the two sides today?
Well, the meeting lasted about 20 minutes, and the Pentagon spokesperson says that U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan had said that he found the talks with his Chinese counterpart Wei Fenghe constructive as well as productive. Now, we understand that both sides were said to have discussed ways to build military-to-military relations with regards to reducing the risk for miscalculation as well as misunderstanding. And both sides were also said to have discussed ways to cooperate to enforce North Korean sanctions. Now, no word yet from the Chinese side, but ahead of the meeting with Mr. Shanahan, Chinese Defense Minister Wei Fenghe was said to have he said that the meeting will be quite important and that it would have a positive significance. Now, of course, this is the first time in 8 years that China is sending a defense minister to this dialogue here in Singapore, and all eyes were on whether the two defense ministers will meet on the sidelines of this meeting, especially comes ahead of rising tensions between the two sides.
Jeremy, there's plenty tabled for this dialogue, but US-China tensions, they're expected to dominate this weekend, aren't they?
Yes, certainly U.S.-China tensions are certainly dominating this entire Shangri-La dialogue here in Singapore. Now, ahead of the session here in today, U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan had said that he's going to focus on China, in particularly the militarization of China's militarization of islands in the South China Sea. Now, just recently, just to recall, the U.S. had sailed a missile destroyer, the USS Preble, to within 12 nautical miles of the Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea. That's an area claimed by both China and the Philippines. And in response, China responded by strongly urging the U.S. to stay away from such provocative actions. But besides military tensions, there's also trade tensions that's dominating headlines around the world. And just on Wednesday, state media People's Daily from China issued a stern warning to Washington, telling them, don't say we didn't warn you. Now, that loaded phrase has been used by China in times of serious conflict. Now, if you recall, in 1962, China had used that phrase ahead of armed conflict with India. And again in 1978, China also used it ahead of the Vietnam invasion. So certainly a very loaded phrase, and certainly something that U.S. as well as Chinese watchers are watching very closely. But back to the talks between the two defense ministers, are we expecting much to emerge from the talks? Most analysts are not expecting much to come out of the talks right now so far, because it's unlikely that they will have a breakthrough. As we have seen so far, Mr. Shanahan is just the acting defense secretary, and much of the direction is set by Mr. Donald Trump, the U.S. president in Washington. And a tweet by Mr. Trump could change all the dynamics here in Singapore as well. And also because the mistrust between both sides, the U.S. as well as China, is just growing day by day. And just recently, China has warned at using raw earths, which is needed by he's warned at limiting the exports of rare earth, I must say, that's used by the U.S. high-tech manufacturing sector. And that certainly would carry severe ramifications for U.S.-China ties as well.
Jeremy, thank you very much for that update. Jeremy Ko there, our correspondent, reporting for us at the Shangri-La Dialogue being held right here in Singapore.